The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey, hello everybody. Able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Josh?
You're
Cool.
good.
All right. I'll go ahead and get started then. I'm sure there'll be some people hopping in as we go. No problem though. We can recap this to be recorded as well. So my name's Jeff Stone with Merit Solutions. Going to be talking today about top signs that your Dynamics 365 implementation is at risk. So at the highest level, a few things we're going to cover. Some of the typical pitfalls within implementation, the D365-Specific challenges, and some approaches and some tips on what to do about it, how to make sure you stay on track. We'll probably go about 45 minutes. There'll be some time for some questions at the end. If you're not familiar with kind of the AX UG or the D365 UG Summit tracks, this is a little bit like the PM one if you're going through that. So I'm not going to get too technical. I'm not going to talk about how to troubleshoot latency between your Azure and local networking, or specifics about financial dimensions in your operations instance. But going to look at it from a lot of different angles. The attendees here could be coming at different stages. So I'm going to try and talk about risks you could identify early on, all the way through to you're live and you're still in trouble. So we're going to kind of go about it that way through the implementation and talk about 10 or so different signs that you're in trouble and what you can do about it. Just taking a quick step back. So again, I work with Merit Solutions. We're a gold partner outside of Chicago. Been doing AX implementations for many years, GP before that. We'll show you a little bit more about Merit in a second. I personally have been with Merit almost 5 years. Before that, was always with the end user. So again, probably most of the folks on the line right now are more of the end users versus other partners and consultants. So I have that background. That was always my niche. Put my favorite quote on here. I think I just have a tendency to get into the big ugly projects, but that's what drives me. Whether it's ERP implementations, migrations, acquisitions, like working on the big ugly things, and I think that's where it gives you that opportunity to shine, and that's kind of what the quote is saying there. They say you're supposed to talk a little bit about yourself when introducing and what you like to do in your life. I really don't have much of a life. I'm chasing after my 4 kids every day, trying to keep up with them and all their activities. So that's a little bit about myself. Going into Merit a little bit more, just, we've been around for many years working with Microsoft. We're a full a partner that can get all the different pieces of the puzzle now, and more even than ever, the mobile, the IoT, the machine learning, the Azure services. We've done all that for many years, even before D365 put it all together. So this is a good collection now of talking about some of the tips we're going to see. It's not just from the implementing AX perspective or CRM, but also some of the things we'll talk about have to do with being on the cloud and trying to interact with other pieces of the Azure puzzle. All right, so before I get into any of the specific tips, these are the top 4 reasons, according to a recent Gartner survey, that it's related to ERP, but you can say CRM, any other type of HR, marketing, whatever you want to call it, implementation, the reasons they fail. And the top 2, I kind of put those 2 together. You could say those are almost cop-outs or excuses, but we'll talk about them a little bit. There are a couple risks you can be on the lookout for related to those. The bottom 2 are the most common, so they're in bold, and we'll talk about those quite a bit because that certainly is applicable to some risks that you can see. So going for the first 2 quickly. So if you're just starting out with your journey to D365 or any big ERP implementation, one of the big things you'll hear about is transition management and change management, and that could be a whole hour webinar right there. So I'm not going to get into it too much, but there are signs where the morale's not where it needs to be. One of the things we've seen just as a really good tip is to have that strong kickoff. Have your swag around the room, people getting new whatever it is, mouse pads and coffee mugs, and hey, this is our journey to D365. If you can get Microsoft to join you for your kickoff, that's great. If you can have your CEO up in front of everybody talking about the goals of the project, why this is the right time for your organization, why D365 was chosen over the other, the competitive systems that you looked at. That's going to, get that morale going, and give you that buy-in, to let people know that this is a project that is worth doing and worth shedding some sweat over. The other thing I think of right away with those not having the right team and not having enough buy-in is that even the best consultants in the world can't be successful unless the client is prepared and has the right expectations of how much work is really going to be involved. So one thing that Merit does is when we give you guys our estimate for a new project, and we say, hey, this is going to take X number of hours and this many dollars, the other thing we have right next to it is this is how many hours we expect from the client to participate along with us. And sometimes those are the numbers that they really get hung up on. And the prospects say, geez, I thought you guys were just going to come in here and do this for us. And that's a huge perception issue that you got to make sure you're on the same page from the beginning, is that this can't be the second job for a few people to try to help implement a large system like this. You need to have, we've had people that have backfilled resources so they could be full-time on these projects, or at least we've had the right expectations set where certain folks are only available, Monday through Wednesday because they have their day jobs Thursday through Friday. Whatever it is, having the right expectations around how you interact is huge. And obviously, having a good partner that knows the different pieces of the puzzle, that is, has a good connection with Microsoft, has been through it before. That's obviously a part of having the right team as well. So I like to show this. So here's that, we'll say sign number one that you're in trouble, is that you've lost that love and feeling. So let's say you have that great team, you have a kickoff, everyone's ready to go. The sign that you're in trouble is that you're not hearing that buzz anymore. You're not hearing people excited about things. You don't know where you are, what milestones have been hit. This little chart shows how at the beginning everybody is blissfully ignorant, and as you move along throughout time, you learn more, you become informed, and the anguish starts. And then at the bottom there, every project goes through this valley of, all right, we got to dig in, get through some things, realize what's really possible, and knock it out, and end up with being confident and moving forward, having the system you envision. That bottom stage where people can check out, that's the first sign, is that people are either, like I said, not having that look anymore, that they're excited about this. You don't have any champions emerging that are really going an extra mile and asking questions, learning about the things that are coming out every week, it feels like. Or maybe you have one or two people that are doing everything, and they're working 60 hours a week, and they're the only ones that are taking on this project. So either one of those is a bad sign, and especially the latter, those folks that put in the 60-hour weeks and do this on their own without the help they need, typically end up going to work for a partner like Merit. So definitely a risk if you're seeing people that are not getting the help they need. You're not in the you lose that optimism. Going back into the first part about having the right team and trying to make sure that people don't check out. There's a couple things you want to consider when you're putting that core team together. So you want folks that are close enough to the details that can help make decisions without having to pull people in all the time. So typically it is more of the middle managers, the AP manager, the production warehouse lead. You want folks that can be accountable to make decisions quickly, also can quickly get to the people that have the details if it is some exception case that you're talking through. So there's a lot of different ways you can structure these teams, but we typically try to make sure that you have good representation in each area, not just the executives, not just the doers, but a lot of the folks in the middle, and giving them that accountability. Sometimes that's new for people to be the decision maker on these projects. So that's a big part too as we talk about change management and in general project management 101 type of thing. So I'm not going to get into it too far today, but it's just kind of the first step. If you're not seeing that early on in the project, if you're not seeing that momentum, that excitement, you got to find a way to build that back in, find some milestones you can celebrate. I'm thinking of story specifically a few years back when Merit was implementing a previous version, AX 2012, and we were doing it on Azure when Azure had just become a certified platform for AX. I think this was the summer of 2015. And we had a client that said, yeah, this is great. We've been waiting for this. Let's go do it together. So we had that blissful ignorance, and we got down into it, and there were just certain things that were not working. I mean, there are now settings in Azure when you deploy virtual machines that came to be because we were struggling with things together with them, and they turned our suggestions into standard features. So we had to have that strong team that was ready to work through the adversity. We had to have that tight relationship with Microsoft, and we came out on the other side with a positive scenario. Okay, so sign number 2. So obviously you have the inspired team now that's ready to go. You've got the right incentives, the right expectations. So the next sign that your implementation is in trouble would be if your team isn't sure what they're supposed to be doing and when they're supposed to be doing it. And obviously this comes down to planning and communication. But there's a couple things that I just wanted to share here. I think the days of having a team of consultants come in to a client, sit down with the Starbucks and say, hey, tell me about your business for a few weeks. That as a partner, I could say that I don't think that should even be acceptable. So as a client, I'm sure you're thinking that. So we need to be coming prepared. You need to have agendas and requirements, and every session should be valuable. These things I'm showing here are, again, general project management types of things that any project should have. But there's a few things in here with providing status reports, and the main idea is not to sugarcoat things. So you need to make sure that your PM team, whether that is a internal PM or the partner's PM or external PM, that's coordinating things from the outside, whatever it is, you need to make sure that you're getting the risks identified at the right times. You have your issue and change management procedures in place. And then the real thing that comes down to, though, is you need to have a methodology for the implementation. So a lot of partners refer to SureStep, and that is the kind of standard that Microsoft has put out. At Merit, we've actually taken that. We've spun it a few different ways to have a couple different methodologies that we use. With D365, there's all kinds of new tools and techniques as well that you should be making sure you're using. The LCS tool has some really good business process modeling techniques. There's implementation checklists to make sure you're along the way working correctly with Microsoft. Sometimes that's a little bit of a pain and you don't want to do it, but there are some positives in there of making sure you dot all the I's, cross all the T's before you're going live, for example. So I'll just show for a second, a couple different ways of thinking about projects. Obviously, most folks have heard of waterfall and agile and different ways of having a methodology. The couple I'm showing here, this is really a reference to what Merit calls our rapid model, Rapid 365. And the idea there is that if you have planned correctly and if you're trying to do things that are, best practices across different industries, there's probably somebody that's done it before, and you may not need to spend 6 months in an analysis phase around how you're going to, get purchase orders out the door. So what we've done is we've set up the top track is basically a SureStep. We still obviously have those implementations that are very large. There's global. There's all kinds of manufacturing and integration, production, quality. We call that ERP My Way. And you still have those phases where you need to have a very structured business transformation sessions, assessments, before you can get into design. You need to make sure you uncover all those major requirements before you start designing and configuring. But then the bottom track, the rapid, is really, hey, there are other clients that just want to put in the best practice. Give me something I can put in quickly, and I know I can build on it later, have all the great functionality of D365. But for now, I just want to have AP, AR, GL, a little bit inventory, a little bit of procurement, and then we can add to it. So this has been a really valuable tool for us. We spent, I don't even know, over 1,000 hours building this with all the different pre-configured business process models and standard configurations that you can start with. And along with that, though, even more importantly, is that we have agendas and workshops of how we're going to implement it. So the first day when we sit down, it's not, tell us about your business, what do we think we should do, how should we go about this project. It's here's what the system can do. We need you to challenge us if this isn't going to fit your business process, if we need to find another solution. Otherwise, let's go with it and let's move on to the next area that is more unique to your business. So there's more about that online. We can, again, talk about that model if you want to. You can ask us for that later on. But that's just kind of the idea of you have to have a model in place, a methodology, and every partner probably has a little bit different view of it. Obviously, you want to pick one that works for you guys. On that kind of same topic, I mentioned before, there's different approaches of what they call the waterfall. Get all your analysis done before you start any requirements, or design before you start any configuration. And then there's the more agile, like let's see how far we can get just getting our hands on it, configuring it. Maybe have a handful of targets we're going to try and hit in a small period of time. And I don't know if we invented this word or not, but Merit, we talk about agifall now, where there are times where doing something with iterations makes a lot of sense. So even if we're doing a rapid deployment and we're trying to get all of our requirements gathered so we know, what major design considerations there are, there may be one or two areas where we know we just need to do some trial and error, get our hands on it, and see what really is going to work for the client with some dummy data or whatever it is. So in parallel, we can have these little iterations going, like, all right, let's put in some purchasing approval hierarchies and spin through different examples of how they want it to work to make sure it's going to be a fit and not a gap. So again, you can get these quick wins. There's a lot of try to get the best advantages of both the agile and the structured waterfall approach is really what we're getting at there. All right, a little bit more on planning. This is, again, just another hint or a sign. If your PM is telling you everything is great, there's probably a risk somewhere that's not being communicated. This is where I talked about sugarcoating things. These projects are so complicated, and there's so much new functionality being delivered with every release, every platform update every month, every application upgrade a couple of times a year. If you're in a large implementation, you almost want to see some change orders coming out saying, hey, we didn't even think about this because it didn't exist 6 months ago, and now we want to use it. So that's kind of what I'm getting at there, is that there should be some risks, or at least some backlog items that are coming across some challenges to the scope, we'll say. So I would say there should be some contention a little bit going on with these projects because of the fact that the tool is, the system is still newer, it's evolving. Partners are still getting up to speed with certain areas. I mean, I'll admit that there are times that Merit has gotten into things recently where we had worked with it before, but maybe not as much as we are these days in D365. So it's, there's a learning curve there. Every partner is going to have their strengths and weaknesses. I think those are the main things there. There's going to be questions that take a while to confirm, or maybe even need some deep testing, and you want to have those risks and issues documented. We'll talk about documentation in a minute, because this kind of goes hand in hand with, well, where do you put all these requirements and things like that. So I'll talk about that next. But in general, it is critical. There's a lot of different tools right now, too, that are out there. I mean, in the past, maybe you used SharePoint for a repository, but now there's these Visual Studio Team Foundation Services, which is a really good tool. It used to be more for coding and developers, but now there's integrations with LCS, and it's a good way to track requirements, and I'll show you that in a little bit. That's one of the models that we use right now. So having all this stuff in place, I know this is kind of project management 101. It's not really specific to D365, so I'm going to skip through it pretty quickly. But this is another sign, though, is that I like to say, if everything looks like it's great, there's probably something missing. This can also refer, just to finish the PM topic, one of the things we see a lot is that special cases around the actual go-live itself are not being discussed until it's too late. And I'll give you an example is, you've got all your data migration planned, you're going to bring over open balances only, and you're going to have to do something with your open transactions to kind of see them through, like receipts that haven't been invoiced yet. That's one of the big ones that we see where there's not enough communication about how that's going to be handled and tracked, such that by the end of the day, once a payment comes through, you need something to apply it to. So you need to have that receipt. Well, if it was already received in the old system, how do you bring that over without having the purchase order there? And there's a whole chain of kind of go live cutover planning too that really often gets missed. So that could be kind of sign 3.5, is if you're not talking about your cutover planning, that's definitely something you'll want to make sure you raise. Okay, going into scope and requirements a little bit more. You don't know what's being asked for, you're never going to get there. There's a lot of different ways to review that. But yeah, if you have that strong team, you have really good project management practices in place, still plenty of risk that can occur. I talked about having those workshops being predefined and knowing what people are getting into. So if you walk into a workshop and it's supposed to be talking about purchase requisition approval process, and there's some processes you're talking through and who should do what, and then you get stuck on, well, how is our item master going to look? Because is this going to be an item or not? And what are the categories and procurement categories? Don't try to solve that problem around what does the whole item master look like in that session if that wasn't the intent of it, because you're not going to have the right people there. You're going to end up rehashing it, going back through it again, wasting time. So that's part of it, is knowing where to stop in each of these workshops. And the other thing is knowing where to stop as far as how much functionality to add. What we see often on these D365 projects is we actually started one where phase one was supposed to be just time and expenses for one, or maybe it was, for one entity, and then global, and then they were going to put in even before financials and CRM and all these other things. But as we're progressing, things switched over completely to, well, let's get this one entity in first, or hey, HR just came out and it looks good, why don't we implement that first? And I know our PMs were going crazy of how to manage this with so much new stuff, and we're doing demos of new functionality and talking to Microsoft of how that factors in. So while it's important to hear about all those desires and requirements, making sure that the right scope that is carved out to begin with. And what we like to say is, if it's not in the current phase, it's in the next phase, and it doesn't really help to try and line out 7 different phases and what's going to be in each of them, because once you get beyond the current phase and the next phase, it's going to change anyway. So we like to try to just say, is it current phase, is it phase 1, or is it deferred, and go with that. Let's see if there's any other major notes here. Again, this all goes back to planning, having the right people, having the right expectations in place as well. And this is just an example of kind of clear requirements. We get requirements as well that say, we need access to our current data in our BI tool. Well, what does current mean? Or we need to be live in Q1. Well, what does that mean? Is it the first day of the quarter? Is it the last day of the quarter? Is live mean that you have nothing left to do in your legacy system, or can you still close out a month over there? So those are the types of questions that, as you are going through the requirements gathering process, want to make sure that those are clear. Kind of talked about this a minute ago, but rehashing the decisions over and over. I know it's a little tough to see. Screenshots here are of a project we're using TFS for, where we load in the requirements. And really what this does is it gives you that traceability. So even if you have that strong methodology, strong team, great PM stuff in place, there's going to be changes. There's going to be, consultants or team members that start to gain all this knowledge in their head and don't document it correctly. So this is really the big risk right there that you're in trouble, is if you notice that you're rehashing decisions over and over, like, man, I thought we talked about this already. Nobody has it written down what the answer was. This is a really good tool, this TFS, to document your requirements, to mark them as confirmed and approved. You can get sign off if needed, to then tell if it's a fit or a gap with the system. If it's a gap, then you need a design for it. You have the design traced right to it. If there's some development that's needed, that's great. That goes with that design that was approved. So when you get into testing, you can go back to the requirements. I've seen many times where something is developed, it gets asked to be tested, and the people don't even know why it was developed or what test cases they need to have. So having everything linked back to these requirements is huge. It's that place where you can point people back to and say, you know what, you weren't at that meeting last week, but we already talked about this. Here's all the requirements that we agreed on. We don't need to go back and rehash that. And then definitely, as we mentioned, going further downstream, having all that testing documentation in place, this becomes your repository of how you got live. And in many industries, this can be used for some of the compliance. I won't say that it can make you a validated system, but it helps with, there are some implementations we do where this portfolio, we'll say, of all the documentation is critical, and it's just as important as any of the functionality. Again, there's a couple other obvious things in here. This becomes transparent. You can add in notes and comments. You can link to the business process maps in D365, which is a really good tool. I don't know that I have a screenshot of them, but in D365, you can, through LCS, you can see the process maps, the Visio basically diagrams of how the system is supposed to be used, and you can create these too on the fly by doing almost like a recording session of making transactions in the system. So there's some really good tools that can be used now. Going back to which requirements you should document and to what level, we put even the most basic things in here. If it's, hey, I'm just trying to, we need to be able to do a three-way match on a purchase order or receipt or something that the system just does out of the box. We'll still put that in here. We'll say it's a fit, but then there's probably some exception somewhere that you want to ask about, and this is a good place to document all those kind of exception cases as well. We work with food producers that have laws about how they pay for dairy products that are subsidized, or pharma clients that have strict quality compliance requirements around printing labels before things can leave a clean room, or whatever it might be. So by default, yes, about half of these, at least, maybe even 75% of these requirements are going to be the same for any implementation, and that's part of our rapid model I talked to earlier. We kind of have all these loaded in, however many hundreds of these requirements to go through, but then for any company is going to have their own unique ones as well. So again, the gap, the risk is that you're talking about things over and over. This is just a cooler view as well of that same, once you're in a tool like TFS, you can produce, and again, these are using Power BI, which is, comes with D365, but we actually have this looking at our TFS environment. So we can say, all right, we've got 940 requirements that were identified. We've got them assigned to different people. We've got different areas. HR has 104 requirements, and we've got statuses of them. We have the days remaining until go live in the green over there. So again, this is a really cool tool, and it goes back to the communication and some of the PM stuff. This is what the people on the team want to see, the stakeholders, they want to see this. They don't want to just hear after 2 months, yeah, we're still in the design phase, because that's going to crush your momentum, your morale. If you can be saying, you know what, we've identified 940 requirements, we have 23 gaps that we're working on, we're cruising right along. It's a much better message for the team to keep that inspiration there. All right, so now we'll get a little bit more into some of the D365 specific things. What I try to depict here, and this comes from a different webinar I've done that I can point you guys to in a second, but in a AX or D365 CRM, there's about 10 different kind of building blocks that you need to be thinking about and have checkpoints regularly of whether you're on track with these. So it kind of goes across. This isn't the functionality as much as it is the surrounding technologies and how you're going to do some things. And with Azure especially, D365, there's some unique new aspects on these that we want to discuss. Basically, if these are not considered early on and you're a month away from go live, you're going to be scrambling to figure out if you made a mistake early on. So we like to do, maybe it's not every week, but in the monthly checkpoints, the PM talking to the technical solution architect, talking to the IT team from the client, just to say, are we missing anything? Do we have plans in place to at least start to talk about each of these? Some of them are self-explanatory. Accessibility, though, you get into security and licensing, which the licensing models have changed a few times with D365 with all the new apps that are coming out. So you have the unified licensing now, where you can get the AX, CRM, keep saying AX, the finance for operations, sales, marketing, HR. I mean, the licensing structure becomes pretty attractive. If you're in for the financial and operations part, to package in and get the rest of it has become a big win, and that's why we are seeing a lot of momentum with the talent module. People are looking forward to the marketing module that's in kind of a beta mode right now. So accessibility, the way you handle the licensing too, even early on, and how you step into it, for example. So if you're going live with one small entity to start, but then you're going to be adding additional licenses, there's some considerations too around the environments that you'll need. By default, you may get it comes with 3 different environments, but as you go live, most clients need a 4th or 5th environment to be able to do additional phases of development, but also support production. So we'll talk about IT in a little bit further in a second. Training outputs, a lot of these are pretty self-explanatory, making sure you're thinking about the reporting needs, and obviously there's a new way to think about that now with Power BI and dashboards, machine learning. I'll talk about that in a second. Just making sure you have the right support and maintenance in play, and you're setting yourself up to be flexible going forward. So one big area there is with D365 having to choose the right starting point data center even for your application. So if you have a global operation, there's ways that you can test the latency before you pick the data center that is the home for your, let's say, US and Europe-based operation. So maybe you go with Western Europe, or maybe you go with Eastern US. But there's ways you can test that now and see what latency is among the different organizations that you're going to be hitting it from, because it is one central database still, we'll say, that's hosted somewhere. And there's other things you can do around that with Express Routes. There's a lot of Azure architecture tools that can be used, but it's a consideration that you want to think about early on. So again, this is part of a bigger webinar. If you are a UG member, or if maybe even you can talk through to Merit, I think we can get you copies of this. But there was a whole webinar series we did that really dug into each of them. But the ideas were basically you need to be looking at all these to have a full picture. And then you need to assess which ones, are you strong in, which ones do you need to partner up and ask for help on. It was a big bad wolf analogy. There was what is your house made of? And that was the idea there. Just to hit a couple more real quick, when we're talking about training, D365 is, to me, much better than previous versions. The help sections are improved. Customer source videos I think are getting pretty strong. The business process maps, as I mentioned earlier, help to really visualize things. The task recorder is still a solid tool, so you can, again, go back through and build some of your own standard operating procedures using the tools out of the box. So training to me has been improved. Outputs, I mentioned Power BI and workspaces, and I think I have a screenshot in here of all the cool workspaces that come with D365 now. But one of the other things is just thinking about your outputs differently. I've been trying to tell my consultants, don't ask the client what output they need, what report fields they want to see, but ask them why and what they're trying to infer from it and what they're going to do with that data. Because chances are there is an algorithm we can tap into and use some of the machine learning capabilities and try to come up with a report that doesn't just show your aging and clients that haven't paid in a while, but show me any client that made an order this time last year that hasn't made one in the last 6 weeks, and kind of predictive analysis. So there's a new way of thinking about even your BI and your outputs that I would make sure we're encouraging, and that would be a risk there too. If your partner is just asking for outputs and mock-ups of the outputs versus asking why, to me that's an immediate risk. A couple other ones around D365. So when we talk about efficiency, the first thing I think of is using some of the mobile apps that are out there. Expense reporting is one that's come along pretty nicely. I think there was a clunky version in previous versions of AX, but the product they have right now, at least with the latest, I think it was 7.3 release, I think they did a good job with that. So you can quickly utilize expense report entry. send them through approvals, that attach your receipt to the picture on your phone. So that seems to be one that a lot of our clients are looking into. So hopefully, if you're considering D365, that's an area you would be considering. I think we've hit on most of them. Again, support, there's a lot of different support and maintenance kind of going together. The way that you manage your environments and request changes to go into production has changed. So the partner can't just log onto the SQL Server and run a script anymore to fix something, right? So there's a lot of interactions with Microsoft that you need to work through, and so that would be a consideration as well. All right. Getting a little bit more on the same topic, but not necessarily around an area of the implementation, but a specific module. So this was something I pulled that we found that people, they bought D365 because they had AX and they wanted to upgrade their financials. But really, after they've seen a demo or over the last few months, they're like, man, this talent module is great. I wish we could put that in, or something about project service or field service. The field service one is pretty slick too. That's probably, again, from the, we'll say, CRM side, the field service module with the different capabilities and drag and drop of resources, and there's some really cool tools out there for organizations that have that field service need. But the thing that I wanted to mention is if you think of that as an afterthought, it can cause challenges to how you've configured the financial system, or vice versa. If you start doing project service automation in the without it touching the finance and operations, but then you want all your project hours to show up somewhere as a cost in the operations, there's considerations that you would have done differently, how you do certain things. The other thing is looking at the roadmap at dynamics.com and just seeing what is planned for the next releases. And I've been pretty pleased with how Microsoft has kept to what they've put out there. So most of the things that have been out there really are coming in the next release. And again, the releases aren't as frequent. It's every 6 months or so. But between the spring release last year and the one that came out this fall, they pretty much nailed what they said they were going to on their roadmap. And that's helped us a lot in these implementations to not try to solve a gap that's being identified. And the other thing is, if you have the right relationship with Microsoft, you can ask for things to be added into this roadmap, and if they think it's valuable, they'll put it in there. So going back to having Microsoft at your kickoff even, they'll do the fast track program with you when you buy your licensing. That's more of a, hey, we want to get you into Azure spending money as fast as possible with your licensing. But there are some benefits that come out of that too. If you can build the right relationships, have people that you can lean on when you want to ask questions about what's coming in the roadmap. But that's kind of one of the big risks we see, is that people are not thinking about it as a global D365 solution. Even though technically there are different pieces, you're still installing sales separately from finance and operations. The common data entities that are supposed to make this all seamless in one happy system, they're evolving, but they're not there yet. That's probably one of the biggest struggles and complaints we still have as partners and implementers. But they're improving. They're improving every release, and it is making it easier, and it's giving us that framework to move forward and to have that one big happy system someday. There's also some tools that aren't even shown here, but things like Power Apps and Flow and ways that you can extend the system. Want to make sure you're asking your partner, hey, should we be doing this using Power Apps instead of writing a custom code? Or even better, kind of hot off the presses, I know in one of the next releases, there's going to be the ability to kind of I won't say user-defined, but user-configured custom fields on the finance and operations side. So that's something CRM's had for a long time, but AX, you've always had to write code to add a field on the finance side. So now there's going to be let's say a configuration tool to add custom fields into forms, for example. So if you're getting ready to do that and can wait till whenever this next spring release comes out, tell your partner, hey, let's not spend the money customizing, adding fields if it's going to be standard functionality before you're going live. In general, I guess the point of this slide is that we found that, again, most of the C-level executives, they're buying the Dynamics Prod D365 because of the platform, the Azure technology. I mean, the president of Microsoft came up through this line of the business, and he's pumping. It's a huge investment for them. There's things that you read, such as a book. There's some cool things that he's got envisioned, and you can kind of see the roadmap of how this is going to become a not just a tool to enter transactions and spit out numbers, but to give that predictive analysis that we talked about and some of those other cool technologies. All right. Okay, so yeah, this is just if you haven't seen the sampling of all the different analysis workspaces, it used to be more of a financial tool, but there's workspaces now for production and procurement and all kinds of other areas, HR, talent, learning. And these are customizable without too much effort, and they keep growing as well. Kind of just to finish up the topic of some of the newer technology. So Merit, we have our own IP called Max Life. It helps to add in quality management for some of the FDA-regulated industries. So what we've done is we try to take on some of this same tips and tricks and say, well, what can we do that's a little bit more advanced? And can we, in this example here, is an inventory shelf life analysis. This is a new dashboard, and we're trying to use some of the predictive logic in here, not just to show, hey, here's what the statuses of all my batches are, but here's ones that will expire in the next 30 to 90 days, and this is your on-hand value by expiration date. So there's just a lot of opportunities to get creative and to show some things a little bit differently than maybe has in the past. Oh yeah, this is just another example where we actually built in the ability to use an IoT device. So in the quality module, if you have to read a measurement from a device, you can have that now interacted in all through Azure. Have your devices, whether it's temperature or a scale, whatever it is, connected in through Azure, so that as you're doing your quality inspection, by clicking a button in D365 that says read the measurement, it's looking at that device that's up on Azure, going to get the reading, bringing it back into D365. So a lot of cool integration opportunities that are available now that maybe weren't in the past. All right, we've talked quite a bit about IT, but I'll just hit a couple other things. Is that even though we say this is software as a service, your IT group is going to need to be involved, and there's a handful of reasons for that. I mean, obviously getting up and going, getting things synced with your local directories, getting your SharePoint and TFS and all that stuff set up. Like I said, you have that Microsoft help out there, but if your IT is not involved right now and you're thinking that this is a business project because it's a software as a service and just kind of plug and play and be off and going, that's definitely a risk. I can tell you in real time, last week we had a situation where a client that has been live for a few months was starting to complain about performance. They were saying it just wasn't where it needed to be. People were saying things were taking minutes instead of seconds. And we would log in, our own consultants would log in remotely with our accounts, and things would look fine. And we talked to Microsoft, and they were, and we looked on the Azure dashboards, and all the servers were looking good. So again, there's some skills there of how you even monitor these environments now that your IT should be aware of, so that you don't always have to go to Microsoft or your partner that's managing the services for you. So everything is looking good, and we have clients that are just, Microsoft's just pointing their fingers back saying, it's on you guys. Everything looks good from us. And we ended up realizing that there was some web browser caching settings. So basically, when users were logged in for over time, hours throughout the day or even days straight, their own local internet settings were causing some really serious slowness. And again, that was an issue that we had to work with the client's IT to figure out. It was kind of out of Microsoft could tell us, hey, the servers look good. When we connect, everything looks good. It's on you guys. So even though it's cloud, you're still going to have IT interactions that you need to work through. So I wanted to make sure that was noted as a risk if you're not involving your IT group as much as they probably should be. This is big too on integrations right now. So I mentioned Common Data Service with D365. That can only get you so far still. There are pieces of the puzzle that you're going to have custom integrations for, and whether that's using Azure tools, the service bus, something like a scribe, you're going to have some a little bit different approach than maybe typical ERP systems in the past, where you could just go right onto the server, drop a folder there, and have files start to hit it and suck it into the AX or your other system. You just don't have the black box now, the production, so you have to architect things differently as well. So having that kind of technical solution architect, and as well as your IT engineers involved early on is definitely the advice. Going on to a couple other, again, the last couple topics I want to talk about are really more related to upgrades or even your live and kind of post-go live scenarios. Again, we have a whole other webinar that's been posted. We can send you a link to around upgrading. But if you're being told, so the sign here is, and hopefully this is early on, but if you're being told that it's going to be a seamless upgrade to D365 from a previous version of AX or CRM, that to me is a big risk. There are a lot of differences, obviously, in going to the cloud technology. The code in particular, with the new version that's coming out this spring, the idea of layering an AX is no longer supported, so you have to move and we say refactor, but it's looking at all your code and almost rewriting it. So there's that hadn't been a requirement until this spring version, so technically you could still do things the old way, but that's going to end and it's going to have to be done with this next release. Obviously, you want to look at the functionality that you've already had custom and see if it is standard now. And there's a lot of different aspects to an upgrade that that you need to consider. A couple other things that I know are going to be coming soon. I talked about the fields being able to add custom fields. I think that's in the next release. The other one is alerts are coming back. So if you're an AX user and you are trying to figure out how to solve the gap that was alerts missing in D365, that's targeted in the next release. So again, staying up to date with that roadmap is helpful in making sure that you're ready to go. And this is referring more towards upgrades. I could go for hours on this. There's a lot of different nuances based on your starting point, what you're going to. I actually pulled this from our rapid methodology, but it applies to an upgrade project too. I mean, you have to think about the the environments, the data migration, and testing. It's not just up and going. Specifically, again, with 2009, there is a tool. It's a data migration tool. It's use the data import framework. You start by selecting what company you want to migrate, configure it, and basically it's a pull down the data and reload it into the new environment. And you can connect from your old environment up to the Azure one and do it all from one dashboard. So there are tools in place for this related specifically to the data. And again, we've done webinars on this in particular. With 2012, it's a little different. There's a whole, I'm not going to get into this too far, but at high level, you have to prepare the environment. There's ways you can even estimate how much code upgrading and stuff you're going to have to do based on your current code, which is kind of cool. And then you do your code upgrade, your data upgrade, testing, all that production cutover planning I referred to. So even though it's technically an upgrade because it's a previous version of Dynamics, we refer to it more like a re-implementation, and if we can take advantage of some of the data upgrading tools, that's a bonus. I would say right now of our 2009, 2012 clients that are moving towards D365, it's about half and half of whether they're going to start fresh and just almost treat it like a legacy system that was not Dynamics, or if they're going to use these tools and techniques and try to do it as more of an upgrade. All right, so my kind of last sign here, we're about 50 minutes in, is that if you don't have the plans in place for the support that you need ongoing, you're not sure how you're going to handle the questions that come up, which they certainly will. You're not sure how you're going to create that new Power BI report that someone's asking for when they know the data's in there and they're just not sure how to get it out. So again, this is a little bit of a plug, but with Merit, we have a Merit Care group that is a managed services. The goal is not just to fix bugs; it's to to help you get the most out of your investment. And to start, yes, maybe that's fixing bugs and offering additional training for people that right after you're live. But really, the goal is to keep going and to gain the most out of your investment. There's a couple other things that we do when we're. This is another webinar series that I can share with you guys. But if you're already live and you're really struggling, we have again, I go back to, you need to have a methodology, right? You need to have a plan. This is kind of our, I'll say cheesy version of one of our rescue plans, if you will. But the idea is that, don't go right into trying to, implement the functionality that was on your phase 2 list if you're not even able to get purchase orders out the door or invoices. So there's a few different steps to this process here of how you recognize you have trouble, get organized, stabilize, optimize things that are taking a while, and then really start to get the most out of your system. So again, just wanted to say that regardless of who you're going with, even if it's a VAR change or something like that, there should be a plan in place of how you get through some of this. So I'll skip through that, but recognizing, we talked about that a little bit. If you're already live, and I'd say by the numbers, if invoicing is less efficient than it was before, or you're not shipping and producing as many things as you used to, there's some metrics that you're just not hitting after going to D365. That's another sign, obviously, that you're not meeting some of the goals that were targeted from the beginning, and maybe there's a better way to be doing things. Especially if you went live, say with more than 6 months ago, the versions of D365 have evolved so quickly that there's probably not even bugs, but just gaps in functionality that have been improved that you can look into. So that's kind of the recognizing. Getting organized, we talked about a lot. There's another one of those Power BI dashboards of all the different features and 52 gaps that are identified out of whatever it is, 500 different requirements. And then obviously the end goal is to really, ongoing, keep working on your list of priorities, maybe even look back at some of the end-to-end processes and try to find those efficiencies. This is almost like the lean principles and the, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost like I can't remember the Japanese term I'm looking for right now, but like a Kaizen blitz or something, right? Of trying to figure out, all right, we're working, but what can we make better, and continuing to think that way. All right, so we've pretty much hit what I wanted to cover. So I mean, there's the 10 areas. I know there's a few minutes left. If anyone had been putting any questions in along the way, or had any right now, we can address them. I know I have one colleague on here. I don't know if you've seen anything come through.
Right now, we only have one question, so I'll go ahead and ask that again. If you have any questions, you can use the Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your screen. But this question is more on just the process of changing VARs, and how hard is it to change VARs, or how much rework is required when you go through that process? Okay,
yeah, good question. We're in the middle of this right now, and technically, it's not a hard process at all. It's minutes or hours at the most to become the new partner of record and change those settings in a couple places on your subscription and in partner source record. Functionally and procedurally, it goes back to making sure you have what should have been there from the beginning, and I'm referring to documentation and things like that. So it can be handed over to Merit or another partner. So that's a little bit of a loaded question, but I think technically the changing of a VAR is not a challenge. What we found in the past is that we want to work and do it amicably with the previous partners. Inevitably, there's going to be something that we want to be able to lean back and ask them why they did something a certain way. So the client obviously would manage that relationship and ensure it's any breakup is tough, right? But that's the technical side of it is that it's not too bad. We've been through it quite a few times, and usually we can come out of it by seeing what's already in place. You can almost reverse engineer code if you need to, if you're not sure why something was developed a certain way, or configurations too. We have all those kind of standard processes now, and we can look in and say, all right, well, how did you get to where you are? Even if you don't have the documentation, we can kind of see how far you are from what we consider the best practice, the standard way of doing it, and go back through and say, all right, yeah, maybe, why do you think you went this direction? Kind of maybe uncover some of those requirements again. Very good.
That's the only question I see. So I think moving forward, this webinar was recorded. I will follow up with all attendees and provide that recording. I know Jeff also mentioned a couple of different presentations he's given in the past. If you want to see any of those presentations, please reply, let us know. We're happy to share those. Otherwise, thanks for joining us today and have a great day.
Thanks a lot.